Hello, welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. We are very passionate about two things, technology and our world. In each pod, we will be interviewing some fascinating people, business leaders, but those with a special interest in solving the biggest issues facing humanity today. Think the environment, think healthcare provision during a pandemic, think global social injustice. If you want to know more about technology's immense potential to fix and transform, then you're in the right place. In this episode, I speak to Margareta Mucibabici. Margareta is Public Affairs Manager for UiPath and a champion of the company's Automation for Good initiatives. With business leaders increasingly looking to reduce climate impact and become more sustainable, RPA, or robotic process automation, could have a big part to play. In the interview, Margareta shares examples of how RPA can be deployed in this context and the challenges of turning theory into practice. But first, I ask her about current adoption levels of the technology.
Of course. But first of all, Ben, thank you so much for the invite. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk about these important topics, very dear to my heart. But indeed, let's get straight into the topic. Speaking of enterprise adoption, organizations are increasingly investing in automation as they're prioritizing their strategies and initiatives around digital transformation. And robotic process automation is a mature technology. But at the same time, I think we're only getting started, and there's a lot of potential out there, and a lot of companies are starting to see the increasingly, benefits of this technology. So they're scaling their level of adoption, and this was also accelerated by the pandemic, because in this unfortunate situation that we have been confronted by, we've seen how important it is to be able to take decisions fast, to become efficient, more efficient, productive, and these are very important elements and very important outcomes brought by robotic process automation.
Yeah. Maybe Margareta, for those listeners who maybe aren't aware of what RPA is, what are the use cases? What have been the traditional use cases for this technology?
So let's start first by talking a bit about robotic process automation, and short RPA. I think that the easiest way, right, it is to imagine a process that you do at work on your computer, and think about an activity that you do very often, and it's pretty much the same every time. And most likely there are a number of rules for why that specific activity has to be done in a certain way at a certain time. And then imagine that this process can be done by a robot. This time, it's not a physical robot, it's not a manufacturing robot, it is a software robot that sits on your computer. And this is, in short, what robotic process automation does. It emulates human activity. It learns the process that is highly repetitive, manual, rule-based, and then it does it for you. And thinking about, let's say, traditional use cases, I think of it in two ways. One, those processes that exist irrespective of the industry, the type of company that you're in. Every company has, to some extent, processes around invoices, right? Management processing, payroll, customer or vendor onboarding, not to mention data migration and validation. And if you imagine those activities, you will see that a lot of those activities have these rule-based specific activities where RPA can lend a helping hand. So this is one way to look at it. And at the same time, the technology is industry agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're in, let's say, the public sector or the private sector or nonprofit sector as well. There are specific rule-based activities depending on your sector that you have to do that fall under these categories of rule-based and high volume. And we've seen this for example, in healthcare, right? We're talking about COVID-19, right? And in the impact. And there is a lot of administrative work that has to be done in healthcare. So, in addition to the purpose, right, of the healthcare industry to support patients, there is also administrative work that has to be done because otherwise, it cannot function. And when we're thinking about all the data, the patient's data, the records, the appointments that healthcare staff have to do, and we think about the COVID-19 and the immense volume, then you can realize how big the potential and the help from automation can be.
Yeah, and that healthcare example, Margareta, is, I would say, an example of automation for good. What does automation for good mean to you and to UiPath?
So let's think about automation for good in a broad way to begin with. And it's actually a thought process that I had when I was trying to define it. And it all started with a list of questions that were on my mind and were on our minds as we were looking at the impact of technology on society. We were thinking about COVID-19 and other events that were taking place. So I think we're in a moment in time where a lot of stakeholders, so including organizations, but also thought leaders, policymakers, you know, um, nonprofits, key opinion leaders are voicing uh, questions around the positive impact of technology, right? Tech for good. What is tech for good, and how can tech be leveraged for good? And how can we maximize the positive impact that the technology can have? But I think another important layer is how we collaborate in order to maximize these results. So this was more or less, let's say, the thought process around automation for good. And automation for good, as we are looking at it at UiPath, is very close to our corporate purpose to accelerate human achievement. This is very important for us as a company, and it is an initiative that has the sponsorship of our leaders and founder. And we're looking at it from two dimensions. How can we leverage automation so that we can attain the maximum positive benefits and results? But also, what are we automating so that we achieve this goal?
Hi, I'm Daniel Brigham, editor of the Tech for Good magazine. I hope you're enjoying this pod, and if you want more, why not head over to techforgood.net for some amazing and thought-provoking stories. You can read about one company's mission to use digital technologies in the fight against HIV, or learn how social media can help refugees take control of their narratives. For those insights and more, read and subscribe at techforgood.net.
Margareta, that companies today, they have much grander objectives than just being profitable. They want to have a positive impact, don't they, on society. They want to, and in a real kind of authentic way, I think now a lot of companies are beginning to do that kind of thing. Maybe share some examples around how you think automation can fit into that and fit into those companies' objectives.
So one of the areas that I think is becoming increasingly important, and we're seeing it now with COP26 and a lot of other initiatives. It is essential for businesses that they embrace socially responsible business practices. And when we think about automation and the traditional benefits and dividends from automation, we think about productivity, We think about efficiency, we think about speed, but we also think about resilience. We think about transparency and responsiveness, especially in the public sector. We have a lot of use case in this direction. But I think the next step, the natural step, is what are you going to do with those results, with those outcomes? What for are you using the additional speed, efficiency, and productivity? So it becomes a question of purpose. And at the same time, you can think of it in a different way. What are the areas of your businesses that could benefit from those from the return on investment or the return on value from automation? What are your critical processes that could be enabled with automation to become faster, more transparent? And if we take a step back and think about the earlier mentions around environment, sustainability and governance and responsible business practices, this becomes a very important area right now. And when we couple the power of automation with these goals that organizations have, we see a lot of synergies. We see a lot of ways in which we can leverage automation to help enable those targets, those goals. We can talk about sustainability, and one of the, let's say, the easiest to spot benefit would be to have less paper, declutter, and this is very visible early on, especially since we're operating digitally. But at the same time, if you take if you look at it more in depth, you can think about the processes that you want to automate. So you can think about supply chain. And right now, this is a very important focus. How do organizations that have very important ESG goals and want to make sure that their vendors, their partners, are committed to similar goals, because this becomes also a topic of similar values, right? And this is a very simple use case if you think about it. You can screen easier all these applications, the onboarding processes, to make sure that your partners, your vendors, are also committed to similar goals, such as you are. But there are also other ways in which we can look at it. And another example is, how are we automating, right? The first dimension that I was mentioning. And as we know, we are already part of the future of work. And there are a lot of roles being created. And there's a new demand for skills. But there are also employees that have difficulties with finding new opportunities, right, to enrich their careers or to just take on different jobs. And democratizing automation and access to automation also within an organization is a very important component of leveraging automation for good. Because when you have a program dedicated to automation, it helps very much to have a very transparent and close communication with your employees, so that you explain them the process that's going to happen with digital transformation and automation. But you also create the space to address concerns. You also create the space to create new opportunities. For example, we have, as UiPath, a goal to democratize automation. We have an online learning platform. We have the partnerships with the education institutions, with Academic Alliance. But also, as organizations that take on automation journeys, it's also an important component for them to be able to put these resources and make them available for their own employees. You don't know who is going to be your next RPA developer. And we've seen that. Because when you're setting up an RPA center of excellence, you're creating jobs, you're creating new roles. and there might be employees within your organizations that would want to take on that new opportunity.
It's really great, Margareta, to hear, see behind the curtain of it and see how UiPath is navigating this landscape and wanting to use its technology in positive ways. Do you have any specific examples of what your company is doing? Any you don't have to talk about specific clients necessarily, but it could be
Yeah.
internal, external examples of how you are putting this mission into practice, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. So let me share an example on that. What are we automating, right? The new use cases. And I think a very important area is the fact that we can use automation to monitor, for example, air and water quality. Most importantly, process energy consumption data with speed and accuracy. So again, leveraging those traditional benefits of automation, but looking at them from a different lens and from a different area. Streamlining waste management processes. Again, the supply chain. Uh, Another example that I really, really loved was with an infrastructure solution firm, I think, that processed around 400,000 invoices per year, but with automation. But the results, besides the efficiency and the productivity and the transparency, was the fact that they managed to save around 300 trees. So that was an instant result connected to sustainability and environmental goals, and also around 8,000 kilowatts per hour. So energy. So just automating invoices could deliver such a result. Not to mention those specific sustainability processes that each company with a strong, ESG agenda has.
It seems to me that the real opportunity here is in the versatility of the technology itself and how, as you said earlier, it's industry agnostic. It
Yeah,
can be applied in so many different ways within pretty much any organization. I'm sure could find a use case for it. And as you've said there, it might not even be a an automation for good like program, but actually it could end up saving a company some or certainly having a positive impact on that company's sustainability program without even knowing it. And I think when you
yeah,
imagine that at scale and when you imagine automation being used more and more as companies become more and more intent on doing good, that must feel like a really exciting opportunity, especially for UiPath.
I absolutely agree, Ben. I think you just used the keyword intent and becoming intentional. And I think a lot of the benefits of leveraging and using this technology are yet to be uncovered because the potential is very broad. But we need to become intentional about it. So looking at at UiPath's own commitment to leverage automation for good for our internal, practices was a very interesting example from our IT organization. Our colleagues use automation to streamline help desk processes with the intent to make computing resources usage more efficient. And with automation, they have managed to reduce cloud computing usage, I think around by 65%, uh, and by 98% in processes related to IT service management and cybersecurity functions. Now, this is a very clear example of how you can use automation with that specific intent to to manage the way you're using energy and resources.
Who says children can't change the world? Our Teenage Tech Stories podcast showcases the extraordinary work of young entrepreneurs on their way to becoming tomorrow's tech leaders. Listen now via the Tech for Good podcast stream or by visiting techforgood.net.
Really, really great insight, Margareta. I want to ask you about the challenges you see going forward? Because we've spoken about the opportunity, but I'm sure there will be challenges still, and there are
Mm.
challenges, of course, with this topic. It's a mature technology, but there's still so much adoption to be done. What's your view on that?
So some of the things that I'm considering right now is a challenge that automation for good remains theoretical and less practical because it has a philosophical, nuance to it. We're talking about good. We're talking about what good means. Also, the reason why for us, we at UiPath, we looked at the UN SDGs to help us focus on a blueprint for good, right? So this can become theoretical, and it is to some extent, but at the same time, when you're putting your intention and making it, work within an organization, I think it's really important to have a strategy around it, because otherwise it can only remain a statement. And the key here, and I think that's a key for automation in general, is to put it in action. So really thinking about how you can couple a strategy around automation for good and connect it to the organization's mission to see how this technology can support, accelerate that specific mission. Uh, Thinking about whether the organization has an ESG agenda or a CSR, very a CSR agenda with specific goals, and then bring in the people that know automation. Maybe it's an RPA Center of Excellence, and bring in the people that focus and are experts in those areas, in sustainability, for example. Put them together in a room, show them how automation works, and let innovation work again. Because when you're combining and when you're making this transfer of expertise between one business unit to another, I think there's a lot that happens, and there's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of creativity going on. And I think this is an important area for us to continue to explore, because the RPA COE can really become that hand, that arm that helps those other business units implement the targets that they've set easier by leveraging automation.
Mhm. I want to ask you about I think still, Margareta, there's a perception, I think a lazy perception that automation can have a negative impact, especially on people, and in terms of changing jobs, in terms of even replacing jobs. Now, this debate has been had many times, and I'm sure you've spoken about this many times publicly. Is that when you think about that, like how important is the work that you're doing around automation for good, and really pressing home that message that this isn't about taking people's jobs away, it's about augmenting people's jobs, giving people better jobs, giving and through automation for good, giving organizations that greater purpose. Like, when you can what do you think about that kind of argument?
No, absolutely, Ben. I think the fears around the impact of automation are very important, and they need to be addressed. And I think some of them come from perhaps a lack of understanding of the technology, how it works, what it does, what it can do. We're also living in times where there's a lot of information going on online, and if you're not very accustomed with what this technology can do, then you can pick up on so many things and then have a very different outlook and different understanding of what the technology is really doing. So I think once again, we need to do a better education and explain how the technology works, and going back to organizations and what's happening when they're taking on automation journeys, really have that transparency and that communication within the organization. I think is very important, addressing the fears and the natural resistance to change, and obviously having data and having examples to share to employees or the wider population. on what it is happening at the on employment and the impact on jobs. I think a very important aspect would be that automation replaces tasks and not jobs. And I think when we imagine the myriad of tasks that we have, each of us in our roles, this becomes much more easier to understand. For example, I have a background in law, and I used to work as an attorney at law, and I had a lot of tasks that could have been automated. Back then, I didn't have the technology to work with it, but using that technology to automate those specific tasks would have made me, less of a lawyer, right? Especially since lawyers are now dealing with a lot of data on their own. And again, collaboration, right? We need to work more closely together. And one of the partnerships around automation for good that I think it's extremely impressive and humbling is our partnership with Autonomy Works, where we're working together to make automation more accessible to individuals, neurodiverse individuals. So it's fascinating to see how joining forces with an organization such as Autonomy Works can bring light in this area, and see how the technology can create new employment opportunities for neurodiverse individuals that are facing, unfortunately, unemployment. It's very high, I think around 80%, but correct me if I'm wrong. So creating new employment opportunities with the help of automation is again a great example for how we need to collaborate further to make the future of work more accessible and more inclusive.
It's clear hearing you talk, Margareta, and that example there about the neurodiverse people and helping that group of society, and some of the other examples you've shared, that UiPath is obviously doing so much. Does that come with a responsibility to drive this and continue to look for new ways to expand automation for good and continue to just be the leader in that market?
Absolutely, Ben. So as I was saying at the beginning, automation for good is so connected to the company's purpose to accelerate human achievement, and we are committed to make everything that we can so that employees, but also the wider society, has access to automation skills and to this technology, that using this technology is as easy as possible, and at the same time create this conversation that's going to be ongoing, because I don't think we're going to have all the answers in 6 months, right, around what is the impact of automation on the future of work in our society, and continue to drive innovation and collaboration together. And I think collaboration here is critical for progress and for maximizing positive returns, because we, as you said, we're working with technology. We have expertise covering sustainability and other important areas, but joining forces with others that are really looking into these areas can only bring new opportunities for innovation and progress.
That was the Tech for Good podcast. Listen, subscribe, and rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher.